Chapter 3, Part 2. Aaron joined Moses on a rocky hill overlooking a stretch of land to the east. Others were nearby, just down the hill, watching, but respecting Moses' need for solitude, waiting for Aaron to speak to him for him. Aaron realized Moses was becoming more accustomed to speaking Hebrew. Soon you will have no need of me, my brother. Your words are clear and easily understood. The Lord called both of us to this task, Aaron. Could I have crossed the desert and stood before Pharaoh had the Lord not sent you to me? Aaron put his hand on Moses' arm. You think too much of me. The enemies of God will do all they can to divide us, Aaron. Perhaps the Lord had opened Moses' eyes to the temptations Aaron faced. I don't want to follow in the ways of those who came before us. What is worrying you? That one day you'll have no need for me and I will be useless. Moses was silent for so long, Aaron thought he did not intend to respond. Should he add to Moses' burdens? Hadn't the Lord called him to assist Moses, not to plague him with petty worries? How he longed to speak with Moses as they had when they were alone and crossed the wilderness together. The years of separation had fallen away. The imagined grievances dissolved. They were more than brothers. They were friends joined in one calling, servants of the Most High God. I'm sorry, Moses. I'll leave you alone. We can talk another time. Stay with me, brother. He continued to look over the people. There are so many. Relieved to be needed, Aaron stepped closer and leaned on his staff. He had never been comfortable with long silences. All these descendants from Jacob's sons, 66, came into Egypt with Jacob, and Joseph's family made 70 in all. And from those few came this great multitude. God has blessed us. Thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children traveled like a slow-moving sea into the desert. Clouds of dust rose from their feet and hooves of their flocks and herds. Overhead was the heavy gray cloud canopy of protection, a shield from the burning heat of the sun. No wonder Pharaoh had feared the Hebrews. Look at them all. Had they joined with Egypt's armies, they could have been a great military threat within the borders of Egypt. But rather than rebel, they had bent their necks to the Pharaoh's will and served as slaves. They had not tried to break the chains of bondage. They had cried out to the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to rescue them. Egyptians traveled among the people. Most stayed on the outer edges of the mass of travelers. Aaron wished they had stayed behind in the Nile Delta or Etham, but that was because he didn't trust them. Had they cast aside their idols and chosen to follow the Lord, or had they come along because Egypt was in ruins? People waved, Moses, Aaron, like children they called. There was still jubilation. Maybe it was only Korah and his friends who questioned the route they traveled. Moses began walking again. Aaron raised his staff and pointed in the direction he led. He did not ask why Moses headed south and then east into the heart of the Sinai. The gray cloud transformed into a swirling pillar of fire to light their way and keep them warm through the desert night. Aaron saw the angel of the Lord walking ahead, leading Moses and the people deeper into the wilderness. Why? Was it right that he should even think such a question? Moses did not make camp again, but continued traveling, resting for brief periods. Miriam and Aaron's sons' wives made enough flatbread to eat on the way, while children slept using a stone for a pillow. Aaron sensed Moses' urgency, an urgency he also felt, but didn't understand. Canaan was north, not east. Where was the Lord leading them? The mouth of the great wadi opened ahead. Aaron thought Moses might turn north or send men ahead to see where the canyon led. But Moses did not hesitate or turn to the right or the left. He walked straight into the canyon. Aaron stayed at his side, looking back only to make certain Miriam, his sons, and their wives and children followed. High cliffs rose on either side. The cloud remained overhead. The wadi narrowed. The people flowed like water into a river basin cut for them. The canyon twisted and turned like a snake through the jagged terrain. The floor flat and easily traveled. After a long day, the canyon opened wide. Aaron saw rippling water and smelled the sea salt air. Whatever waters had come through the wadi during those times of Noah's flood had spilled a sandy, pebbled beach wide enough for the multitude to encamp, but there was nowhere to go from here. Where do we go now, Moses? We wait on the Lord. But there's no place to go. Moses stood in the wind facing the sea. We are to encamp here opposite Baal-zephon, as the Lord said, and Pharaoh will pursue us, and the Lord will again gain glory for himself through Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that the Lord is God and there is no other. Fear gripped Aaron. Should we tell the others? They'll know soon enough. Should we make battle lines, have our weapons ready to defend ourselves? I don't know, Aaron. I only know the Lord has led us here for his purpose. A cry rose from the Israelites. Several men on camelback rode out onto the beach. Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops were coming up the canyon. Horns sounded in the distance. Aaron felt a rumble beneath his feet. An army that had never known defeat. Thousands of Hebrews wailed so loudly they drowned out the sound of the sea at their backs. People ran towards the sea and huddled in the wind. Moses turned toward the deep waters and raised his arm, crying out to the Lord. The battle horn sounded again, and Aaron shouted, "Come here to Moses!" His sons and their families and Miriam ran to them. "Stay close to us no matter what happened," Aaron beckoned. "Do not be separated from us." He took his grandson Phinehas up into his arms. "The Lord will come to our rescue." "Lord, help us," Moses cried out. Aaron closed his eyes and prayed for the Lord to hear. "Moses," the people cried out, "what have you done to us?" Aaron handed Phinehas to Eleazar and stood between his brother and the people, staff in hand. "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? We should have stayed in Egypt. Didn't we tell you to leave us alone while we were still in Egypt? You should have let us go on serving the Egyptians. Why did you make us leave? Our Egyptian slavery was far better than dying out here in the wilderness." Moses turned to them. "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Pharaoh's army is coming. They're going to slaughter us like sheep." Aaron chose to believe Moses. "Have you forgotten what the Lord did for us already? He smote Egypt with his mighty hand. Egypt is in ruins. All the more reason for Pharaoh to want to destroy us. Where can we go now with our backs to the sea? They're coming. They're coming." Moses raised his staff. "Just stand where you are and watch the Lord rescue you. The Egyptians that you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. You won't have to lift a finger in your defense." Aaron saw by Moses' expression that the Lord had spoke to him. Moses turned and looked up. The shining angel of the Lord, who'd been leading them, rose and moved behind the multitude, blocking the entrance of the great wadi that opened out on Pi Hahiroth. Raising his staff, Moses stretched out his arm over the sea. The wind roared from on high and came down from the east, slicing the water in two, rolling it back up, so that the walls of water rose like sheer cliffs of the wadi from which the Israelites had come. The pathway of dry land sloped down where the depth of the sea had been, and straight across and up to land on the other side of Yam Suf, the Red Sea. "Move on," Moses called out. Heart leaping, Aaron took up the cry, "Move on!" Raising his staff, he pointed forward as he followed Moses into the great deep walls of water on either side. The strong east wind blew all night as thousands upon thousands of Israelites raced for the other side. When Aaron and his family reached the eastern shore, they stood on a bluff with Moses, watching the multitude coming through the sea. Laughing and crying, Aaron watched the people come out of Egypt. Impenetrable darkness was over the rocky terrain of the canyon through which they had come, but on this side, the Lord provided light, so the Israelites and those traveling with them could see their way through the Red Sea. When the last few hundred Israelites were hurrying up the slope, the fiery barrier holding the Egyptians back lifted and spread like a shimmering cloud over land and sea. The way opened for Pharaoh to pursue. Battle horns blasted in the distance, chariots spread across the beach, then narrowed into ranks. Drivers whipped their horses down into the pathway, into the sea. Aaron continued standing on the bluff, leaning in the wind. Below him, Israelites struggled against exhaustion, hunched between the weight of their possessions. They must hurry, they must. He felt Moses' hand on his shoulder and drew back, submitting to the silent command to be calm. Don't be afraid, Moses had said. Just stand where you are. But it was so hard when he could see the chariots coming and the horsemen and troops behind. There were thousands of them, armed and trained in a race to kill those who belonged to God, who had destroyed Egypt, and God, who had killed their firstborn sons. Hatred drove them. As the Egyptians neared the slope upward from the sea, a horse went down, overturning the chariot behind him, crushing the driver beneath. The chariots behind veered off. Horses screamed and reared. Some shook their riders loose and galloped back. The troops broke ranks in confusion. Some were trampled beneath the hoofs of riderless horses. At last, the last few Israelites scrambled onto the eastern shore. The people screamed in terror of the Egyptians. Israel! Moses' voice boomed. He raised his hands. Be still and know that the Lord is God. He stretched out his hand and held his staff over the Red Sea. The east wind lifted. The water spilled into the pathway, covering the panic-stricken Egyptians and tumbling current, drowning out their screams. A mighty flume of water rose skyward and then descended with a mighty splash. The Red Sea rippled and then fell silent. Aaron sank to the ground, staring at the azure water, tumultuous just seconds before, now tranquil. The waves lapped against the rocky shore and soft wind whispered. Did they all feel as he did? Terror at seeing the power of the Lord visited upon the Egyptians, and exultation for their enemy was no more. Egyptian soldiers washed up on the shore below him, hundreds face down in the sand, their limbs gently lifting with the waves and resting again in the sand. Aaron looked at his sons and daughter-in-law, his grandchildren gathered close around him. Egypt boasted of its army and weapons, its many gods, but we will boast in the Lord our God. All the nations would hear what the Lord had done. Who would dare come against the people God had chosen to be his own? Look at the heavens. The God who laid the foundations of the earth and scattered the stars across the heavens was protecting them. The Lord, who could call forth plagues and part the sea, was overshadowing them. Who will dare stand against a God like ours? We will live in security. We will thrive in the land God is giving us. No one will stand against our God. We're free and no one will ever enslave us again. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Moses' voice carried on the wind. He has thrown both horse and rider into the sea. Miriam took her tambourine and hit it, shaking it and singing out, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. She hit the tambourine again, dancing and shaking the instrument. He has thrown both horse and rider in the sea. Aaron's daughters-in-law joined her, laughing and crying out in abandon. Sing praises to the Lord, sing praises. Aaron laughed with them, for it was a wonderful sight to see his aged sister dancing. Moses strode down the rise. The people parted for him as the sea had parted for all of them. Aaron walked with him, tears streaming down his cheeks, his heart bursting. He had to sing out with his brother, the Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my victory. He felt young again, full of hope and adulation. The Lord had fought for them. Aaron looked up at the clouds spread over them. Light streamed shimmering colors as though God was pleased with their praise. Aaron raised his hands and shouted his thanks and praise. Thousands cried out in jubilation, hands reaching toward the heaven. Some knelt, weeping, overcome with emotion. Women joined in Miriam's dance until there were 10, 100, 1,000 women spinning and dipping. He is my God, Moses sang out. He is my God, Aaron sang out. He strode alongside his brother. His family members fell in behind them. Others gathered around, raising their hands and singing out. Miriam and the women danced and sang, "He is our God." Aaron's sons sang out, faces flushed, eyes bright, hands raised. Filled with triumph, Aaron laughed. Who could doubt the power of the Lord now? With his mighty hand, he had broken the chains of their captivity. The Lord had mocked the gods of Egypt and swallowed up in the depths of the sea, the army of the most powerful nation on earth. All those who had boasted that they would draw their swords and destroy Israel were now dead among the shores. Man planned, but God prevailed. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? There is no other so awesome in glory who can work wonders. The nations will hear and tremble. Philistia, Edom, Moab, Canaan will melt away before us because we have the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on our side. By the power of your arm, they will be as still as the stone until we pass by. When we reach the land God has promised our ancestors, we will have rest on all sides. The Lord will reign forever and ever. Moses raised his staff as he led the people away from the Red Sea. Forever and ever, our God reigns. As the jubilation subsided, the people rejoined their divisions. Families clustered together and followed Moses inland. Aaron called his sons and daughters-in-law close. Keep within the ranks of the Levites. The tribal leaders held up their standards and family members fell in behind them. Aaron walked beside Moses. It'll be easier now that the worst is behind us. Pharaoh has no one to send after us. His gods have proven weak. We're safe now. We're far from safe. Well, we're beyond the borders of Egypt. Even if Pharaoh could muster another army, who would heed his commands and follow when they hear what's happened here today? Word will spread throughout the nation of what the Lord has done for us, Moses. No one will dare come against us. Yes, we are outside the boundaries of Egypt, Aaron, but we will see in the days ahead whether we have left Egypt behind. It was not long before Aaron understood what his brother meant. As the people followed Moses into the desert of Shur and headed north through the arid land toward the mountain of God, their songs of deliverance ceased. There was no water. What they had brought out of Egypt was nearly gone, and there had been no springs at which to relieve their growing thirst or replenish their water bags. The people mumbled when they rested. They mumbled on the second day when no water was found. By the third day, anger brewed. We need water, Aaron. Aaron's tongue began to cleave to the roof of his mouth, but he tried to calm those who complained. The Lord is leading Moses into the desert. Have you forgotten the Lord who opened the sea? That was 3 days ago, and we're without water now. Would it have been a body of fresh water so that we could have filled our bags? Why is Moses leading us into the desert? We're going back to the mountain of God. We'll be dead of thirst long before we get there. Aaron tried to restrain his anger. Should Moses' own kin grumble against him? Perhaps it was thirst that lessened his patience. The Lord will provide what we need, from your mouth to God's ears. They were like tired, cranky children, whining and complaining. When will we get there? Aaron felt compassion for those who were sick. Some of the Egyptians traveling with them had boils. Others still suffered from rashes and infections caused by insect bites. They were weary and hungry and thirsty, sweating doubt and fear of what added miseries lie ahead. We need water. We need water. Did they think he and Moses were God, that they could provide water from the rocks? We have no water to give you. Their bags were just as flat as everyone else's. They were just as thirsty. Moses had given the last of his water to one of Aaron's grandsons this morning. Aaron had a few drops left, but hoarded them in case his brother became weak from dehydration. What would they do without Moses to lead them? When they came to a rise, Moses pointed. There. Like thirsty animals, they stampeded toward the growing pond, falling to their knees to drink. But they reared back and spit it out, wailing, "It's bitter! Don't drink it! It's poison!" Moses, what have you done? You brought us out here to the desert to die of thirst. Children wept, women wailed, men shouted, faces twisted in wrath. Soon they would pick up a stone to hurl at Moses. Aaron called for them to remember what the Lord had done for them. Had they forgotten so quickly? Only 3 days ago, we were singing his praises. Only 3 days ago, you were saying you would never forget the good things the Lord had done for you. The Lord will provide what we need. When? We need water now. Moses headed for the hills, and the people cried out louder. Aaron stood between them and his brother. Leave him alone. Let Moses seek the Lord. Be still, be quiet so he can hear the voice of the Lord. Lord, we do need water. You know how weak we are. We're not like you. We're dust. The wind blows and we're gone. Have mercy on us, God. Have mercy. The Lord will hear Moses and tell him what to do. The Lord sent my brother to deliver us, and he has delivered us unto death. Angry, Aaron pointed to the sky. The Lord is with us, and you only have to look up to see his cloud over us. Would that that cloud would give us rain. Aaron's face went hot. Do you think the Lord does not hear how you speak against him? Surely the Lord has not delivered us from Egypt only to let us die of thirst in the desert. Have faith. Aaron prayed fervently, even as he spoke. Lord, tell us where to find water. Tell us what to do. Help us. What are we going to drink? We'll die without water to drink. Moses returned within minutes, a gnarled piece of wood in his hands. He tossed it in the water. Drink. The people scoffed. Aaron knelt quickly, cupped his hands, and drank. Smiling, he ran his wet hands over his face. The water is sweet. His sons and their families knelt and drank deeply. The people ran for the water, crowding around the edges, pushing and shoving and clamoring to get their share. They drank until they could drink no more, and then they filled their water bags. Listen carefully, Moses called out to them. If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his commands and laws, then he will not make you suffer the diseases he has sent on the Egyptians, for he is the Lord who heals you. Had anyone heard him? Was anyone listening? They all seemed so intent on taking care of their immediate needs, they scarcely looked up. Aaron shouted, "Listen to Moses. He has words of life to give us." But the people weren't listening, let alone listening carefully. They were too busy drinking the water God had provided to stop and thank God for providing it. When they left the sweetened waters of Marah, the people followed Moses and Aaron to Elim and camped. They ate dates from the palm trees and drank from the 12 springs. When they were rested, Moses led them into the Sin desert. Aaron heard the complaints daily until he was worn down by them. They came out of Egypt only 1 month and 15 days ago, and it seemed years. They walked through the arid land, hungry and thirsty, vacillating between the dream of the promised land and the reality of hardship in getting there. The Egyptians traveling among them stirred up more complaints. "Oh, that we were back in Egypt," a woman cried. "It would have been better if the Lord had killed us there. At least there we had plenty to eat." "Do you remember how we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted?" Her companion tore off a bit of unleavened bread and chewed it with distaste. "This stuff is awful." The men were more direct in their rebellion. Aaron could not go anywhere without hearing someone say, "You and your brother have brought us into this desert to starve us to death." When the Lord spoke to Moses again, Aaron rejoiced. With Moses, he carried the message to the people, speaking before gatherings of the tribes. "The Lord is about to rain down food from heaven for you. You are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this day, the Lord will test us to see if we will follow his instructions. On the 6th day, you're to pick up twice as much as usual. In the evening, you will realize that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. In the morning, you will see the glorious presence of the Lord. He's heard your complaints, which are against the Lord and not against us." When Aaron looked down toward the desert, the glory of the Lord shone in the cloud. The people huddled together in fear, silent as Moses raised his hands. "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. Yes, your complaints are against the Lord and not us." And so it was. When the sun began to set, quail flew into the camps, thousands upon thousands of them. Aaron laughed as he watched his grandchildren run and catch birds and bring them to their mothers. Before the stars shone, the camp smelled of roasting meat. Stomach full, Aaron slept well that night. He did not have dreams of people stoning him or his bag spilling out sand instead of water. He awakened with people's voices. What is it? When he went outside his tent, he saw the ground covered with flakes like frost, white like coriander seed. He put a few pieces in his mouth. It tastes like wafers with honey. Manna? What is it? In Hebrew, manna means, what is it? It is the bread God promised you. It is the bread of heaven. Had they expected loaves to rain down on them? Remember, collect only what you need for the day, no more than that. The Lord is testing us. Aaron took a jar and went out with his sons, daughters-in-law, and grandchildren. Miriam shooed the family along. Moses squatted behind Aaron. Fill another jar and place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come. When they set out again, they traveled from place to place in the desert, and the people complained again because they were thirsty. Each time their wants were not met immediately, they grew louder and more angry. When they camped at Rephidim, their frustration overflowed. Why are we camped here in this forsaken place? There's no water here. What is this land of milk and honey you promised us? Where is it? Why do we listen to these men? We've done nothing but suffer since we left Egypt. At least in Egypt, we had food to eat and drink, and we lived in houses rather than tents. Aaron could not silence their fears with words nor cool their anger. He was afraid for Moses' life and his own, for the people grew more demanding with each miracle the Lord performed. Why are you arguing with me? Moses pointed to the cloud. Why are you testing the Lord? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our livestock die of thirst? Aaron hated their ingratitude. The Lord is providing bread for you every morning. Bread with maggots in it. Moses held out his staff. Because you collected more than you need. Good is bread without water. Is the Lord among us or not? How could they ask such a question when the cloud was over them by day and the pillar of fire by night? Each day brought renewed complaints and doubts. Moses spent every day in prayer, and so did Aaron when he wasn't forced to quiet the people's fears and encourage them with what the Lord had already done. They stopped their ears. Didn't they have eyes to see? What more did these people expect of Moses? Several picked up stones. Aaron called to his sons, and they stood around Moses. Had these people no fear of the Lord and what God would do to them if they killed his messenger? Aaron gather some of the elders and follow me. Aaron obeyed Moses and called for representatives he trusted from each of the tribes. The cloud descended on the side of the mountain where the people were camped. Aaron's skin prickled, for he saw a man standing within the rock. How could this be? He closed his eyes tightly, opened them again. The man, if man he be, was still there. Lord, am I losing my mind? Or is this a vision? Who is it that stands at the rock by the mountain of God when you overshadow us in the cloud? The people saw nothing. This place shall be called testing and arguing. Moses struck the rock with his staff, for the Israelites argued here and tested the Lord. Water gushed forth as though from a broken dam. The elders ran back. Moses has given us water from the rock. Moses, Moses! The people rushed toward the stream. Exhausted, Moses sat. God, forgive them. They don't know what they're saying. Aaron could see how the responsibility of these people weighed on his brother. Moses heard their complaints and beseeched God for provision and guidance. We will tell them again, Moses. It is the Lord who has rescued them. It is the Lord who provides. He's the one who's given them bread and meat and water. Moses raised his head, his eyes full of tears. They are a stubborn people, Aaron, and so shall we be, stubborn in faith. They still think like slaves. They want their food rations on time. Have they forgotten the whips and the heavy labor? The unrelenting misery of their existence in Egypt, their cries to the Lord to save them? We will remind them of the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. the sweetened waters of Mara and the streams of water from the rock in Sinai? Whatever you tell me to say, I will say, Moses. I will shout the words God gives you from the hilltops. Moses! It was a cry of alarm this time. Moses! Aaron pushed himself to his feet. Would trouble never depart from them? He recognized the voice. It's Joshua. What is it, my friend? What happened now? The young man sank to his knees before Moses, panting, red-faced, sweat pouring down his cheeks, his tunic soaked through. The Amalekites, he gasped for breath. They're attacking at Rephidim. They've killed those who haven't been able to keep up, old men, women, the sick. Choose some of our men and go fight them, Moses swayed as he stood. Aaron caught a hold of him. You must rest. You haven't eaten all day, nor have you had so much as a cup of water. What would he do if Moses collapsed? Guide the people himself? Fear gripped him. The Lord has called you to lead his people to the promised land, Moses. A man can't do without food, water, and rest. Can do nothing more today. You're 3 years older than I am, Aaron. But you're the one God has called to deliver us. You're the one bearing the weight and responsibility of God's people. God will deliver us. Moses sank down again. Go out and fight them, Joshua. Call the Israelites to arms and fight the army of the Amalek. He sighed, exhausted. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. And that's the end of part 2.